Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. As we learn for a four Shlema for Akiva ben Chaya Rachel, today's daf is daf Samach Beis in Nizir. Daf Samach Beis. Start with the second line. Ish kiyafli neder. Yesterday we talked about how ish, the extra ish that it talks about by Dabel b'nei Yisrael. Dabel b'nei Yisrael taught us that it doesn't apply to goyim. That a goy cannot be a Nizir. If a goy says I want to be a Nizir, doesn't make any difference. He's not a Nizir. The Amartalim includes even an Eved. The Gemara went on to say about how Ish sometimes includes a Goy when it comes to certain things. B'nei Yisrael, Ish. Therefore, we see that Ish does include sometimes the extra Ish that it talks about by Erichin does include a Goy to some degree. Either it could be marach, or he could be ne'arach. Either he can give a valuation, or he could be valued himself or valuated himself. So you might want to think that maybe a goy could be included here in the Naziris also. Kamashma that we don't say that. That's what the Gemara said. But the word ish sometimes the extra double does include a goy. What about in this case? The Gemara now talks about we have the word ish when it comes to making a neder. There, that's in Vayikra Chaf Beis. It talks about that if a guy wants to bring a carbon, he can bring a carbon. He doesn't bring a chatos or an asham, a sin offering. He doesn't have the sins that we have, but he could bring a free will offering, and that's included in ish. And then we have by erichin, when you give a valuation to the base of each person. There's two kinds. You can give either a person's market value to the base of each. Let's say that evidence is worth $1,000. I want to give his value to the base of Mikdash. That's a regular neder that you're giving base of Mikdash. You're giving a donation. There's also erichin, a kind of evaluation which the Torah specifies, depending on the age and sex of the person, what the value should be. 50 shekels, 30 shekels, 20 shekels, 5 shekels, depending on his age and his gender. So that's what this is by erichin. But the question is, the Gemara starts off here in the second line of Daf Samach Beis. Ish kiyafli neder be'erkecha be'erichin lomali. Why does it have to say that holosh michti the isish erichin nadarim? We already know that erichin valuations are already mukas, are juxtaposed to the darim. The pasuk says ish kiyafli neder be'erkecha. Again, it says ish kiyaf. The same pasuk ish kiyafli neder be'erkecha. When it talks about valuations, it also talks about neder. So neder and erkecha are juxtaposed to show you that what applies to a neder applies to erichin. But by the darim. Back in Vayikra Chabes, when it talks about Gimel, it says, "Ish matam ish." What is the second ish? What does the second ish there teach me? In other words, the first ish we understand applies to all people, all Jews. What is the second for? So we already know by Nedarim that a goy is included. He can give a net, he can give a carbon to the base of Mikdash, and since erichin is juxtaposed with net and ner be'erkecha. So if that's saying, so we know already that a goy can give a neder. So they can give free will offerings like a Jew. Ish kiyafli be'erichin lamli. So what are any of that extra ish for? It says ish kiyafli. It says neder be'erkecha. What does the ish kiyafli? What does that ish teach me? Oh, this is what it teaches me. Ish can sometimes refer to a goy, to include a goy, the extra ish, not the first ish. You're right, Avram. Just as once ish, normally it just means a Jew. But if it says ish, maybe it means a goy too in certain cases. But over here, we don't need it to include a goy. Why? Because erichin is already mukash to nedarim, and by nedarim we have that a goy is included, so it should be included by erichin too. So what is the extra ish here? Here he says it's a different thing entirely. To include muflas samach leish, to include that if a person is he's extraordinary, meaning he's bright. He's near the age of bar mitzvah. Let's say a boy is 12 or a girl who's 11. They're already understanding what they should do. That they are also included. Muflas samach leish. That's what ish includes. Says Rashi. Take a look at Rashi. We had yesterday's Gemara. Doesn't really need to teach me the ish that it says by Nazir does not include a goy. So what does it say? Isha there? Well, therefore it says Isha over there because a woman is included. So it makes sense that Isha is necessary to teach us that a woman is included. So it tells us Ish also agavorcha, even though it wasn't necessary. And by Nadarim, that includes Avgachavim, that they can make Nadarim. So what does it teach me, or what does this Ish Kiyafli teach me by erichin? So the Gemara says, oh, you know what it's coming to teach me? it's coming to teach me that a mufla samach leish, if he's only 12 years old, right? Yisrael Shet, they can make also nedarim that ish kiyafli neder, not just by erchen, that as we learned, that a 12-year-old boy or 11-year-old girl, if they know what they're doing, their neder is also considered a neder, and they're bound by it. To include mufla samach leish. If you hold this d'oraisa, there's a machlokas whether a 12-year-old boy or 11-year-old girl, if they make a neder, that it's a good neder, is that minat Torah? If it's minat, if you say that ish kiyafli neder be'erkecha in the pasuk be'erchen, ish kiyafli is teaching me even a mufla samach leish, both for erchen and for nedarim. It's because it's one and the same. Erchen is a kind of a neder now, since nedarim and erchen are juxtaposed. So if you're telling me that mufla samach leish is the right, so fine. This is the source for that. If you say the whole loch is only draban, only a bar mitzvah has a neder. If he's less than bar mitzvah, it's not chal. Draban, the rabbi said, he should just do like a kid who's almost bar mitzvah. You have him fast on Yom Kippur, even though he's not mechuyev min Torah. But the rabbi said he should get used to things, right? They should. So if it's only drabanan, so you can't say the pasuk is including something which is only drabanan. We're saying now that a guy's neder is a neder. How? Because it says ish by nedarim, and by erichin that's mukash to nedarim. But what about a mufla samach leish of a guy? What about that? What about a guy who understands what he is, even though he's not really that much of a mitzvah? It's a little bit of a strange animal. So I'll explain in a minute. Tell me that. So what we're saying is that a goy, if you hold that mufla samach is the raisa, fine. So that's what ish kiyafli is for. But if you hold that a mufla samach is only drabanan, so what's this ish kiyafli? A mufla samach of a goy. Now, which means therefore that a goy's mufla samach is more stringent than a Jew's. Can that be? Usually, something which is mutter for a Jew is mutter for a goy, right? But there are certain cases. Rashi says, there's an example. For example, if a goy's shore damaged ours, he has to pay full price. If a Jew's shore damaged that of a goy, he didn't do it directly, but his animal damaged him, he's potter. So you see sometimes that a goy has a chumrah over a. It doesn't mean when it comes to heter and isser generally. If it's mutter for a Jew, you don't find something which is mutter for a Jew, which a goy is usher for. But in this case, it's not a question of mutter and usher. It's a question: is it chal or not? The concept of Sachlish by Avakacham is Bechal, difficult to understand, because by a guy, what determines liability, or what do you call it, being an adult? A Jew, we know, if he's 13 years old, he's an adult. So if he killed somebody after he's 13 years old, he's chayav misa. If he's not 13 years old, he's not chayav, right? It goes. That's when he's considered adult. A guy, the concept of bar mitzvah, the age of 13, 12, is Allah Mash Misina. It doesn't say in the Torah when a boy is 13 or a girl is 12. It's Allah Mash Misina. That's Allah Misina. So, but a guy doesn't have that Allah Mash Misina. He's not. When is he responsible? He has to keep Shev Mitzvahs B'Noach, and he has to keep. When is he responsible? When he understands. If a guy is 8 years old and understands he's a full adult, he's from the South or whatever, he knows what he's doing there, and he knows what he's doing. They used to having guns and things like that. He knows how to handle himself when he's 8 years old. Then he's responsible then. So what's mufla samach leish then? Mufla samach means that he's understand. Mufla samach generally means he knows what's going on, but he's not quite bar mitzvah. So how do you determine that? So it's a little bit hard to understand what that age is. If he understands what he's doing, then he's already bar mitzvah, quote unquote, for a guy. It's a little bit hard to understand, but anyway, if you so that's what Gemara says. If you hold that mufla samach ish of a Jew is only drabanan, so the pasuk can't be telling you that. Therefore, it's telling me that of a guy. But anyway, the Gemara says that's only going to that's only fine. A Bnei Yisrael could be ne'arach, can be valued. In other words, you can't. The value that we talked about, we mentioned before, the specific amounts that the Torah says in Vayikra, that if you give the value of this person, depending on his gender and age, what the amount is, that's only for Jews. But goyim are not. You can't give the value. The goy have no erichin in that sense. You can give the value of a goy on the market. That's a neder. You give his value, whatever amount, whatever he's worth on the market. But if in terms of erichin, maybe that doesn't apply to goyim. But I might think goyim cannot also give a valuation. Talmud Lomer ish. So that he can give Shapir. So therefore, what is the ish that we're talking about here? So Rashi says the ish that we're talking about by nedorim, not by erchen. The ish that we're talking about there tells me that a goy could be ma'arich, he could give ma'arich. So you know what? The goy could be ma'arich. And what goy? Not only if he's quote bar mitzvah of age, but even if he's muflas samachish, he's near that age also. Elamandor b'nei Yisrael marichim. But if you hold that only Jews can give an erchen, they can't, and they can only donate and pledge, let's say an erchen. But goyim cannot. I might think they cannot be ne'erach. In other words, there's two ways to learn. One way to learn is that goyim can there's no value to them, but they can give the value of a Jew. A goy could say, come on, Clyde can come along and say, I want to give the erchen of Moshe, who's now 40 years old. I want to give that to the Beis HaMikdash. That he could do. So then you could say, what goy can do that? What goy do? Even muflas samachlish. That's what the pasuk of ish kiyafli neder be'ercha. Ish kiyafli teaches me even muflas samachlish of a goy. But if you say that you don't learn that way, goyim cannot give an erchen. They're not included in that. I might think that they're not included in an erchen, that you can't give the value of a goy. In other words, when the Torah gave these rules about gender and age, how much you give for each one, that only applies to Jews, but not to goyim. I might think maybe it doesn't apply to goyim at all. Tamalomer ish. So the ish by nedarim includes that their value. Tell me that the nedarim and the dabas that people give, that Jewish people give, goyim can't give me marach, but Jews can, and Jews can not only give the value of a Jewish boy or girl of a certain age, whatever their age was, but even a guy who's a baby has a certain value to him, a certain erchen to him is included in that too. So if that's the case, what am I talking about? What do you mean you're giving the valuation of a guy? The valuation of a guy can give even if he is not only if he's bar mitzvah, muflas samach. What are you talking about muflas chamish? If you're talking about his value that he gives. Only a Jew can give the valuation, but he can give the valuation even of a goy. Why? Because it says neder. And what does that include? Any goy, even if he's a baby. So if he's a baby, what are you talking about? Muflas samachish. How does the muflas samachish apply there? We said we're looking for what is the ish kiyafli by erech, and what does that teach me? What is it teaching me? We said by nazir the ish is mentioned because it says isha. By nadarim is to teach me that a guy is included. So a guy is included. So he's included by erchen too, because there's a hekesh between erchen and nadarim. So what does ish kiyafli teach me? It can't be teaching me muflas samachlish of a Jew that is a dharm or a dharm. That's only good if it's a doraisa, so you could say that. But if it's a rabbanon, what does it teach me? It teaches me muflas samachlish of a guy. So Gabi, what? That's only fine if we're talking about a guy can give an erchen. So you could say muflas samachlish, even he can give it that too. But if you say that a guy can't give, he can only be evaluated, and that's based on a pasuk in a dara by neder that even a baby is. So what are you teaching me about kish kiyafli? What is kish kiyafli lamli? This is what it's teaching me. So now we sort of fall away from there, and this sort of takes away my issue with what is a muflas samachlish of a guy, because muflas samachlish means he understands. If he understands, then he's an adult. By a Jew, we could say 13 or 12 for a girl is a gadol, is an adult. Less than that, a year within that, he could be muflas samachlish. But what kind of muflas samachlish can you have by a guy? If he's muflas samachlish, if he understands, then he's already an adult. But anyway, the Gemara falls off from that. The Gemara it's not included. In other words, by a Jew, if a Jew is a gadol, once he's bar mitzvah and he makes a neder, even if he didn't really understand what he's doing, he's held accountable for that. It's binding. By a guy, if he doesn't understand what he's doing, even if he's a gadol, right? He doesn't understand. Maybe he's a gadol. He understands what murder is. He understands what rape is, but he understands what a neder is. He doesn't. His lashon, that doesn't count. That's the point. So now we're using it in a negative way to say ish kiyafli, even though we're speaking by a guy. But if he doesn't understand, it's got to be up. It's got to be something that he utters that he understands, even if it's a gadol. But if he doesn't know how to utter something, then he's not. It's not binding. So if that's the case, okay, fine. Now we understand what it says. Ish by nedarim, right? It says over there, ish by nedarim. So there it includes a guy. Ish kiyafli neder be'erkacha. Well, we know a guy is included there too. What does ish kiyafli teach me? That even though he's a guy and even though he's an adult, but if he doesn't understand what he's saying, he doesn't understand the importance or the the meaning of his words, it's not binding. Even though he can make an eder, Goy can make an eder, and he can and maybe he can make erichin too. Erichin depends on how you hold. But if you hold that he can't make an erichin, but he can make an eder, okay, but it's only if he understands. If he doesn't understand what he's saying, it's not his utterance is not clear to him. It doesn't count. What about by Naziris? What is it for? By Nazir it says Ish Kiyafli Nindor Neder Lahazir, right? Mechti Yiskish Nazir Sadarm. We already have a Kish Nazir Sadarm. It says Ish Kindo Lindor Neder Nazir. So it says Neder and Nazir together. So we know that Naziris is juxtaposed to Nadarim. So Kiyafli Lamali. We already know that by Nadarim you've got to be clear in what you say. It says that by Erkacha, Ishki Afli Neder Berkacha, you got to clear what you say. You have to understand what you're saying, and it's already Mukash to Nadarim. So Kiafli Lamli says Rashi, Eli Kiafli Gabi Nazir Lamli Bishlami Ish. I just said Ish by Nazir. He says because it says Ish, so it says Ari Ish. So it's like Isha Kiafli Lindor Neder, right? So it says Ish. Kiafli Lindo Neder Lahazir. V'chenish Gabi Erichan Yisera. So we already explained Ish Kiafli that it says by Eric to teach me that the goy, even though it's a goy, he's got to understand what he's saying, otherwise it doesn't count when it comes to Nadarim. Isha by my Nazir, it has to tell the Isha to say that a woman is included, so therefore it tells the Ish also. But what does it have to say Kiafli by Nazir is for? El Kiafli goes Rachmanim Islam, and the Ish Iskish Nazir Nadarim. So kiafli lamali, to include something. Remember when you use like a handle or an abbreviation which is not clear. For example, a man says there's a nazir walking by and a guy says, "Aha, I," or "I will." What does that mean? He didn't say I will be a nazir. And that's the yadam. That is a good handle, so to speak. It counts. So according to Bai, that's good. That's what Ish Kiafli Lindor Nedra. So Yafli teaches me. We had this in the Dharm also. We had the beginning of the Masechta. Ish Kiafli teaches me that Yadam Shem Mechuch is also Yadam. But according to Rava, that says Yadam Shem is not the Michael name. El Kiafli Boiler Tarfan. So according to Rava will say that we need Kiafli for Tarfan Salacha. The Tanya of Yadam Mishum Tarfan. We had before. Remember, there's 9 guys there, and they're saying, "I'm a Nazir if he's a Nazir." If that guy is Jim, I'm a Nazir. Their guy says that guy's Jim, I'm not a Nazir. And then the 2 other guys said, well, I am if you are. We go back and forth. And he says, you know what? None of them are Nazir. So interesting. The first one, if you say Yadam Shem Mechichas, as Yadam is teaching me what Yafli, that you know what? Even though your utterance wasn't complete, it was an abbreviation, but you uttered it. That's included. But if you hold Yadam Shem Mechichas Lavidayim, then Kiafli is telling me that unless you're clear that you're going to be a Nazir, so you could say, aha, I abbreviated what I said, but I meant to say I'm a Nazir. That's Yadam Shem Mechichas. According to Bai, that's Yadam. But according to Rabbi, that's not a Yadam. So what does Yafli teach me? Just the opposite. Then unless you're clear, in other words, I'm going to be, if that guy is Jim, I'm a Nazir. That guy says that that guy is not Jim, I'm a Nazir. Not clear at that point who's right. So then it's not a Nazir. That's what he says, Yafli. So Yafli here is teaching me he's got to be clear. That's good. The Rabbanan say that they are Nazir in that case. So what are you going to say, Rabbanan? The concept of Atar Sadar, the Torah doesn't talk about if a woman or a daughter makes an eder, a husband can break it. It doesn't talk about a rabbi being matzah an eder. We know Hatar Sadarim that we do every year, or that anybody can do at any time. The rabbi doesn't say that in the Torah. It's headed in Darim. They are flying in the air, so to speak. There's no source for them. They have nothing what to rely on. That's what the Tanna comes to. There's what to rely on. Shenemar says Ish Kiafli and Kiafli Shtei Pam. Where does it say Ish Kiafli? Once it says Ish Kiafli, in this case by Erechim, and once it says it by Nadarim, by Nazir. Ish Kiafli Lindor Neder Lahazir. Shtei Pamim. Echad Afla L'Isr Echad Afla Heter. One telling me the utterance for Isser, meaning that the rabbi cannot be Mavatal the Neder if the person who made the Neder does not regret it. He's got to show that he regrets it. Had you known this, would you have made it, etc. If he doesn't regret it, can't be matter. And the other one is for heter. When he does regret what he's doing, then you could be matter. So basically, he says that what does Kiafli teach me? Kiafli shteim once by Nedarim and one by Erchin. One to teach me that both of them together to teach me that you can go to a rabbi and dissolve the neder. right? Dissolve it, remember, uproot it so it never existed at all. One for Isser, one for Heter. If he finds that he properly regrets it, he could be Matter. If he doesn't find that he's proper Matter, then it stays Usser. So that's what Yafli means at the end. That's got to be clear. He's got to utter it in a clear way that it remains. It remains if he doesn't regret what he said. But if he regrets what he said, that hafla is for Matter. So we have all these various drashas into what Ishki Yafli by Erichin, what does it says for, and by Nazir, why is it necessary to say that? So in the Mishnah, yesterday's Mishnah, it says that Mishnah starts off, the name of this last parak in Adoram is Hakutim Ein Lahem Naziris. Goyim. By the way, in the Mishnah it says Goyim. Is that with the the people who what was it called? The censors. The censors here they put in Kutim, and many times you have it as Goyim. So which way does it work? I think it says Goyim. So the Goyim don't want to see that, right? The Christians probably didn't want us to write Goyim, so they put it in Kutim so that, but it really means Goyim. Goyim can't make it as because it says B'nai Yisrael. That's what we saw in yesterday's Mishnah. What about women? Women can make an eder. It says Isha, right? Could be a Nazir. And Avadim. Why? How do we know Avadim are included? Because it says V'yomar Talim. Special pasuk Avadim are included too. But the Mishnah went on to say Naziris has Nashim Avadim Yesham Naziris, but there's a chumrah, there's a stringency that women have over Avadim. Why? Because listen to this carefully. If you didn't see the Mishnah yesterday, a woman who makes a neder, her husband could break it that day, but if he didn't break it the day he heard about it, it's a full neder. He can't break it subsequently. Whereas an eved, the master can always, I'm going to call it suspend his neder. Kofa means he can force him to drink wine. For example, let's say the master is not only does he want his slave to drink wine, so he should have some energy. Otherwise, what's he going to drink? Again, those days they didn't have Diet Coke, and the water wasn't clean and all that. So he drank wine. Wine was the main liquid that people drank. So he says, if you're not going to drink wine, you're going to be weak, you won't be able to work. So the master can force the slave to drink wine, even though the slave had accepted upon himself Naziris. Talking about Eved Kanani. He accepted himself Naziris. Eved Kanani usually has a loch like a woman, but you might think, since it says, the Gemara says, since the lesser shall not show, Misha Nafsha Kniyah, but you might think an Eved doesn't own himself, and therefore he's not included Naziris Kamashmon, but Marta Lehem, no, he is included. An Eved Kanani could become a Nazir. However, his master, if he so chooses, can suspend it and say, listen, while you're working for me, you drink wine, and you know what, I'm also an undertaker, so I'd like you to bury the dead too. He can force him to be over on his Naziris. Okay, so we said, the Mishnah says, Chomer Nashim Avadim Shu Kofas Abdo, an Eved has a chumrah of an Eved has a kula. The women have a chumrah that once she's a Nazir and he didn't break it that day, he can't break it anymore. She's a full Nazir. She's a full Nazir. She's got to observe all the rules of Naziris. Shaving, it's shaving her head and everything. She can't drink wine, being Tamil Mason, etc. However, an Eved, even though he accepts Naziris, the master can suspend it while he's a slave. During the time that the man's a slave, he can suspend it. What happens after he is freed? Then he has to complete the Naziris. If he the whole 30 days, or let's say he kept 5 days of Naziris while he was an Eved, and then the master said, okay, 5 days I can live with. Or the master only heard about it after 5 days, and he said, I'm suspending it now. So the other 25 days he's got to complete later on after he's free, if he's eventually free. Now the Mishnah says on Samach Beis and Beis, Chomer B'Adam Nashim. So we said the chumrah that women have over slaves is that their husband cannot break the neder after the first day. Can't break it, whereas a Vadim, they could suspend it. Here's a chumrah that a Vadim have over Nashim. Shumei for Nishu, when he breaks it. Now it's an interesting thing, the way Rashi learns it, it's sort of like Shumei for Nishu, that we said before, he can break his wife. It's really one thing that a husband can break his wife's neder the day he heard about it. Break neder her Naziris. So Naziris is a kind of a neder. Shumei for Nidrei, just like he can break her Nadarim, he can break her Naziris. Ve'ena Mefer, the reality, he can't break the slave's Naziris or his Nadarim. He can suspend it, but he can't break it. Hefer Ishto, Hefer Lamis, and this is really the chumrah. The chumrah is when he breaks his wife's Naziris or ned or whatever, it's broken forever. Even if she is divorced or widowed subsequently, once it's broken, it's broken. When he breaks his slave's neder or naziris, it's not really broken. It really means it suspends it. Once he goes out, he gets his freedom, so he completes his naziris, either the remaining 25 days or the whole naziris, whatever it was. But so we're going to talk now about a master suspending his slaves naziris. Tan Rabbanan. Lama Rabba Kafan Naziris for Avalon Adar. Say over here, he could force his he says Aina Mefer Nidre Avdo, right? He can't break it. What does it mean? To Mefer Nidre and after Avdo. There's a chumrah that about him have over Nashon. He can't really break it, but he can suspend it. So Lama Rabba Kafan. Why can he? When it comes to Naziris, why can he suspend it? We said in the first Mishnah that kofa, the lashon of kofa, shu kofa es avdo, that was a chumrah that women have, that women's nazirs cannot be broken, right? He could force his slave to drink wine, but he can't force his wife. Okay, that was a chumrah that women have. The chumrah that slaves have, right? That the chumrah that slaves have is that he can never really break the neder entirely. He can only suspend it, whereas the wives he can mamish a break entirely. Now the Gemara says here, why can he suspend the nazirs, but he can't suspend regular nadarim? Why not? If a slave takes upon himself a neder, I'm not going to eat oranges, or I'm going to give a certain value. Why can't he break that? But he could break nazirs. My shagabi nazir. By nazir, when it comes to nazir, the Torah says, Hashem said, lesser sal nafsho. Right? It only applies, Naziris only applies in full force to someone who owns himself. But an Eved doesn't really own himself. So if that's your reasoning, when it comes to Nadarm also, the Eved doesn't own himself. If the reason is that the reason that a master can suspend his slaves Naziris is because the Nazir doesn't really own himself, it's up to the master. Well, it comes to Nadarm also. If you look at Nadarm Nami. Well, I'll tell you what it's speaking about. There was a cluster of grapes here. So, and what did the slave say? The slave says, I'm not going to eat these grapes. These grapes are usher to me like a carbon. So okay, these grapes are usher. We can eat other grapes. What's the master going to say? If you're not going to eat these grapes, you're going to be weakened and you're not going to be able to work for me. No, you can't eat these grapes. You can eat other grapes. So there's no reason for the master to break the neder of the slave. So he can't force him because he can always eat other ones. What's the big deal? This Eved's not going to eat this cluster of grapes, he'll eat other ones. But by Naziris, when you say I'm not going to eat these grapes, the rule is if I'm not going to drink this cup of wine, that's accepting Naziris we had before. Let's say a person says, I'm not going to drink the wine. Just that cup alone makes him a Nazir. I forbid myself from drinking the wine. That makes himself a Nazir. So since if he's a Nazir and he says, I accept Naziris on these grapes, he's also on all grapes. That's why he can force him. So first the Gemara says, do you know why when it comes to Nazir, the master can suspend the Naziris of an Eved, but when it comes to the Darm, not? Because by the Darm, it's no big deal. He suspends himself from eating these grapes, he can eat other grapes. If he just says, I'm not, these grapes are also for me like a carbon. He didn't do it as a form of Naziris. But if the Eved says, these grapes are usher to me like in a form of a Naziris, then all grapes are usher to him. So therefore, it makes sense that the master can suspend that kind of a Naziris. So the Gemara said, why do you say by the Dharma also that these are the only grapes that are around? He just spends off these grapes. Maybe he doesn't have other grapes. Maybe speaking about these are the only ones around. If he doesn't eat them, he'll be weakened. Maybe that's the only food that the Eved has available to him. That's the only food. The guy has a wine, is a vintner. The owner is a vintner. All he has is grapes. So maybe that's all he can give him. So if he forbids himself eating grapes, he's also going to be weakened. If the reason is because it's just a practical issue. By Nazir, the master has to be able. He has to be able to break it because otherwise the guy won't be able to work for him. But by Nadarm, he can always eat other grapes. Maybe he doesn't have other grapes. Elam Rabbiah, so the Gears Elam Rabbiah. So the Gemara this is a weak answer. It's like the same thing. Elam Rabbiah. He had some grape seeds or pressed grapes there in front of him. He's only also in these, not also in the other ones. Gabi Nazir, but by Nazir, the Yitzhanam Bechrin, he's also for all kinds of pressed grapes. Matzikov, they can force him. So again, by Gavin Adorm, the skin of the like a lichotz. But I'm also going to be, this is all he's got is these prescriptive lochale. It's so strange. The sole answer doesn't seem to make sense because it's the same thing he said before. Once the Elam Rabba, it was only put in to show you that it's one's a buy, one's Rabba. Elam Rabbiya, Lama Rabba. So the issue is not why is he empowered? In other words, we assume the kasha that the master is empowered to suspend the naziris of a slave. He's not empowered to break the nadarim of a slave. Rav is saying like this, no. If he's empowered, he's empowered. But why is it necessary for the master to break the or to suspend the naziris of his slave, and it's not necessary. It's necessary for him to suspend the naziris, but it's not necessary for him to suspend the nadarim or the shvua of his slave. My time, here's a reason. The pasuk says when it comes to shvua, lahar lahativ. Either you swear you're gonna do something bad, like you're gonna fast or do something bad. Oh, there's something good. Ma'atov is just like a tov, just like something good is voluntary. Afaroshes, doing something bad is voluntary. Whereas you can't swear that you're going to do something bad to somebody else. Here, when a slave says, I'm going to not eat something, or I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, I'm making sure, it's going to affect his master. Therefore, the neder is not chal. When it comes to a neder or a shvua, right? When it comes to a neder or shvua, it's not even chal. So when it comes to naziris, he has to force him. Why is it necessary for him to force him? Because he doesn't have to force him for the neder, he doesn't have to force him for shvua. Because when it comes to neder shvua, it says lahara lahativ. It's got to be something good, or it could be good or bad. And if he says something bad, like he's not going to eat food, that is he can't make such a neder. That neder is not even chal. But when it comes to naziris, it doesn't say that. It comes to naziris, it doesn't say that. Rash I look at the beginning of the wide line. It's not the widest. Why does the master even have to bother forcing a slave? If the master doesn't force him to drink, he has to keep his naziris behind. An Eved makes a naziris, it is an nazir. Why when it comes to naziris, must the master force him if he wants him to drink wine? Even without forcing, you can't do that. When it comes to the dorm, it says, in other words, when an Eved says, I'm not going to eat any fruits, or I'm not going to eat lettuce, or I'm not going to have bread, or something like that, such an Eved doesn't work, because it's lahara lahativ. It's got to be something which can work voluntarily, not something where you don't have the ability to do that. An Eved is meshubah to his master. He's obligated to fulfill his master's wishes. And if he's going to weaken himself, he's not going to be able to do that. So therefore, such a neder is not chal at all. When it comes to naziris, though, maybe not drinking the wine, the master could say, you know what, okay, 30 days you don't have to drink wine. Or, I'm not. Plus, because Ramartalim and Nazir's and Eved's naziris is chal. If the master doesn't want to force them to drink wine, that's the master's prerogative. But when it comes to a neder or shvua, it's got to be something which can work voluntarily. And voluntarily, you can't cause somebody else harm. And therefore, in other words, if I'm going to accept upon myself a neder that's going to hurt you, I can't do that. It says lahar leitiv. It's got to, just like doing something good is voluntary, something bad also is going to be voluntary, meaning where it's something where I'm obligated not to hurt you. So if I do something which is going to hurt you, I can't. Such a neder is not chal at all. So it's not like we assumed in the original kasha that on a nazir he can suspend the naziris, but he can't do it by a neder. No, just the opposite. By a neder, he doesn't have to suspend it because the Eved is not empowered to make such a neder which can hurt his master.
Well, what then a nazir would have to be the same as a neder?
Perhaps, unless the master doesn't mind if he doesn't drink wine. He can give him Diet Coke instead. In other words, it's his prerogative. The neder is chal, the naziris is chal.
Why is it different than the neder?
Because by a neder, he's not empowered to make a neder. If it's going to hurt the.
I make a neder that I'm never going to eat. Grapes are grapes.
okay,
What's the difference in this year?
so perhaps you're right. Maybe it has to be something which is going to make him weakened. By Nazirus, the only thing it's also is drinking wine and grape products, right? By a netter, might be other things. Maybe he's going to obligate him. Say he's going to make a netter. All fruits and vegetables are also that can weaken him, and therefore
So it
depends what the netter is. Exactly, depends on what the netter is. If it's a netter, then I'm not going to look at a picture. I'm not going to do something which doesn't affect him. Then maybe that netter would be chal. Right. The Mishnah says like this: Avar can I get fun of? So let's say this goes on. This is really a continuation of the previous Mishnah. That an Eved Kanani who accepts upon himself Nazirus, the master has the prerogative to suspend it as long as he's in his employ. However, once he grants him his freedom, then he's got to complete Nazirus because the Nazirus was chal, took effect, except it was the owner has the ability to suspend it. Let's say the man ran away. The slave ran away, fled. The slave ran away. While he fled, while he's in his fleeing state, can he drink wine or not? In other words, he hasn't been freed, but he escaped. He ran away. So what's his obligation? We said before, if he's been freed, he has to complete Nazirus. What about if he just escaped? Rav Meir says, no, you shouldn't drink wine. He shouldn't drink wine while he's escaped. In other words, he still has the obligation that the master forced him to suspend it as Nazirus, and he could. And I'm sorry, lo yishe, meaning he has to. Meir holds that he has to complete his Nazirus now. Lo yishe shouldn't drink wine, meaning he goes back to his Nazirus. He should drink wine. Should drink wine just like his master had forced him to. While he fled, he should also drink wine. Language Shmuel. Is this really a machlokes in what Shmuel said? Amar Shmuel. You grant an Eved Cheres by giving him a get shechur, by giving him his freedom. What about if you just say, I'm mafker him, I make him hefker? What is that? Is that Shmuel says if you're mafker him, that's also a way of freedom. Bein Tzorke doesn't need to get shechur. So that's what Shmuel says. Rav Meir is like Shmuel. Rav Meir holds a Shmuel because this guy ran away. Isn't that like he was mafker him? The Rambam learns the whole Gemara differently. He says if he breaks the netter of his evidence, granting his freedom. He learns the Mishnah differently. So they all ask on him, but this part makes more sense. It's like Shmuel sounds like the Rambam because he's a mafker after the. So when he breaks his nadarim, when he says that you're not breaks his nazir, when he suspends his nazirus, he goes out free. So maybe that goes like Shmuel. Mafker av, if you're mafker him, gas l'cheres. Then so get shecher. Meir is like Shmuel. Rav Meir holds a Shmuel. Just like when you mafker your eved, he goes out free. So Rav Meir says, yeah, if he ran away, that's like you were mafker him, and therefore he's free, and you shouldn't drink wine now. You should complete his nazirus properly. Rav Yossi less later Shmuel. Rav Yossi doesn't hold the Shmuel. He says no, he should drink wine because being mafker him is not the same. Doesn't hold the Shmuel. He's not really free, and therefore he's under the obligation to drink wine like his master had told him to do. So Rav Yossi doesn't Shmuel. So that doesn't prove anything. Well, everybody holds a Shmuel. If you're mafker your eved, he's free. That's the same as giving him a get shechra. Here he wasn't mafker him. He ran away on his own. So why, if he ran away on his own, why does Rav Meir say? Why does Rav Yosef say yishta? Yosef says yishta. Sof mahadar hadar. He fled now, but eventually he'll be caught and he'll be returned. So you should drink wine now. Shouldn't be weakened. In other words, his master wanted him to drink wine, right, while he was in his employ, so he shouldn't be weakened. Now the guy ran away. Rabbi Yossi says he should continue to drink wine. Why? Because eventually he'll be returned to his master, and he doesn't want to be returned. It's not fair to the master to have him returned in a weakened state. You want him to be able to work. So therefore, he should drink wine, just like he's still, like, so to speak, under his master's spell, and should drink wine. Meir says he shouldn't drink wine. Just the opposite. He should suffer and not drink wine during his time that he escaped, so that he'll want to go back to his master. In other words, we look at it, he really belongs to the master. He wasn't allowed to run away. So the question is, what does he do while he escaped? Rabbi Yosef says he should drink wine. So when he goes back to his master, eventually he'll be returned. He'll be returned. He'll be strong enough. Rav Meir says, no, he shouldn't drink wine now. Let him suffer now and not drink wine. So he'll want to return to the master, because then when he's in his master's employ, the master wanted him to drink the wine. So therefore, it's better for the master. They're both looking at what's better for the master. Better for the master that he should drink wine so he'll be strong, or better for the master that he shouldn't drink wine, so that he'll want to go back to the master and continue working there. All right, we'll pick him here tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem, from the Samach.
First of all, you're right about the censor.
Yeah,
Steinsaltz
yeah.
puts back the original text, and he has parent is called Hagoyim.
Goyim, yeah. No, I just deduced it because in the Mishnah it says Goyim, and here it says
But here, this last month is very, very strange. If he's already running away from his master, he's going to listen. But the
Precious, what you should do, yeah. He's a frum guy. Shavuot Tov.